Today I was on my way back home from immigration. Now, in these days, foreigners have to get their immigration paperwork processed through one central immigration building that is located in Intramuros, which is the old walled city that the Spanish built in central Manila. So it's a little bit of a drive, a little bit over an hour, maybe an hour and 15 minutes, something like that. So what I usually do is I drive my car and I park it at Robinson's Mall, and then I take a taxi to Intramuros because there's very little parking there. It's difficult to park there. And I'm not sure how secure the parking is there. It's just easier to park in the mall for me. And then I can relax at the mall, get something to eat, get some pasalubong, get some gifts for my kids, and then come home. Okay, so anyway, that's the way I tend to do it. So today I was coming back uh, from immigration, and I'm at the Robinsons Mall, and I found myself talking to an Australian who's married to a Filipina, and he's a little bit older than I am, but he said he was having difficulty adjusting to Manila, and he found Manila to be a little bit shocking. And I just right away smiled. And I said, I have to confess, I love this city. And I looked out in the streets of, oh, I almost thought of the name, Pedro Gil, which is outside the Robinsons and Malate. And I looked out, and there's a homeless woman who is begging for change with a cup. And when people pass by, she's angrily like spitting curses at them and shouting at them, and there's tricycles going by, and a guy on his motorcycle, I don't know if he's drunk or on drugs, but just completely upended the bike and wrecked, just without touching anything, right in the circle drive there of the mall. All this craziness is always happening. And I just told him, I gestured out and I looked at it and I said, look at this crazy, crazy city. I really love it. And I started telling him stories about my stories in Manila. And I was sharing them with my wife and with some other family members, and they said, why don't you make a video about that? So I thought, okay, I will. So here's just a couple of my stories about why I love Manila, okay? Now, in order to put you in the proper context, you have to think about eccentric people. Okay, people that are a little bit off, but very endearing. Okay, and there's a lot of TV stars like that in American sitcoms, and that's one reason why I really like American sitcoms in the 21st century. Is that they're very real, and they're based on people that could be very real. Charlie in It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia is one. Another one is, I can't remember the character's name, but he was a very eccentric man on Taxi. And that character, that actor, later became famous for the Back to the Future series. There were three movies in the 1980s, Back to the Future, and it was the same actor, Lloyd, I can't remember his name. But Americans will know what I'm talking about. Okay, those are characters, those are examples of characters that are eccentric, a little bit odd, perhaps a little bit mentally off, not quite in the mentally ill category because they can work, they can have a job, they can, you know, uh, be positive members of their community, but they just don't fit in properly. Uh, Eccentric but endearing. And there's a lot of people like that in Manila, okay? One example is when we bought a car. I'm living here in Cavite, a province outside of Manila. And we found out the car we bought, even though we're in Cavite, it was originally registered in Manila. So we had to go to the original LTO, Land Transportation Office. That's the Philippine equivalent of the DMV, which in the United States is Department of Motor Vehicles. We had to go to the original LTO office in Manila and get the paperwork done in order to have the car titled in our name. So my sister-in-law drove us, and when we're waiting in the LTO office there in Manila, these people keep walking in with stained shirts, and some of the guys have their shirts pulled up over their bellies, and they're scratching their bare bellies, and they're walking in with rubber chinelas, rubber slippers, and flip-flops is what we call them in the U.S. And their hair is just, a mess, I'm looking at these people laughing, and I'm elbowing my sister-in-law, telling her, you just don't see people like this in Cavite. And she looks up and laughs and says, yeah, you're right. And one of these guys just falls asleep in the chair waiting next to us. Well, not next to us, but near us, and snores loudly. And all these eccentric characters. Okay, when you get to know some of these people, it's really amazing. These are really amazing people. Well, Filipinos in general are amazing people. There's a lot, I'm sure, that are violent and bad people, but by and large, it's a cultural stereotype that Filipinos are amazing people. So I'll give you some examples of my stays in Malate. When I stayed at the G Hotel, which was next to the Aloha Hotel, near the Manila Zoo, near the Manila Yacht Club, on Rojas Boulevard, you walk down from the G Hotel, you pass the Palau Embassy, you pass Bohemia Hotel, which was never completed. It was some kind of title dispute in the 1980s. It's still unresolved and nobody can touch it, so it's just sitting there, a giant ruin. And the Aristocrat restaurant is right there, the original location. The old Malate Church, the Max's Chicken, and Shakey's Pizza, all right there around that fountain. Okay, so every day I used to walk from the G Hotel to the old Malate Church for Mass. And then I'd go back to the G Hotel and have my morning breakfast. And then usually I would walk to the Robinsons Mall in Ermita, and the Starbucks would open at 9, and I'd go in the Starbucks and get myself a giant coffee, and then I'd grab a taxi from the taxi stand there at the Robinsons Mall and go about my business in Manila. And then I'd usually go back to the G Hotel around 2 or 3 and sleep, take a nap until the early evening, and then go out again for a few hours and come back and sleep. So whenever I would come back to the G Hotel, the first couple of times I came here, 2008 and 2010, I would tip the bellhops, the people who came out to open the taxi door, the people who opened the door to the hotel. I'd tip them all 50 peso bills, because that's $1 in the U.S. Actually, it's a little bit less, and that's what you would tip somebody in the U.S. is $1. Well, one time the taxi came up and pulled up, and I got out of the taxi, and there were 6 of these guys lined up in front of the hotel, and I realized I'm tipping these guys too much. That I'm making a show, and you really don't want to do that in the Philippines. You don't want to make a show, so I never wore a nice watch. I never wore nice shoes. I always wore beat-up looking shoes, but respectable shoes. So you could go into church and the priest wouldn't give you a bad look, I always wore long pants. I've never been uncomfortable in the Philippines as far as temperature goes. And I never attracted the attention of pickpockets, because I always wore cheap watches and cheap shoes. And those are two things that thieves always look for. When they're looking for a mark for somebody to rob. So I never got in trouble walking from the G Hotel past the old Malate Church to the Robinsons Mall or back. Never. Now I later had a family member, an uncle of my wife, who was named Kuya Tony. For some reason in my wife's family you called him Kuya, not Tito. Kuya Tony was a Manila policeman who later retired a couple of years before I retired. And he was shocked to hear that I walked from the Levante Church to Robinson's and back, and he started telling me about all these stabbings and robbings that took place in that area. I said, no, it never happened to me. But actually, I haven't gotten on the Manila Stories yet. So I became incredibly suki to this hotel and this environment around there. And I still know you walk behind what's now the Aloha Hotel, where the G Hotel used to be. You walk back there in that back alley, and you've got a Julia's Bakery on the right. You've got a Mini Mart straight ahead of you. You've got a 7-Eleven farther down to your left. You've got a Muslim money changer there, and a laundry. A lady that does laundry. Used to do my laundry. All there in a row, okay? Mini Mart, Muslim money changer, laundry. All across from the Julia's, behind where the G Hotel used to be. So I went in the money changers one day, and I saw they had a picture of the Al-Aqsa Mosque. The Al-Aqsa Mosque. So I commented on it. I said, "Have you been on the Hajj? Have you visited the Al-Aqsa Mosque in Jerusalem?" The Hajj is actually the trip to Mecca, but I was a little bit confused at the time. And he looked up shocked, and he looked at the picture, and he looked at me, and he said, "You know the Al-Aqsa Mosque?" I said, "Yeah, yeah. A friend of mine owns a restaurant in the city where I live in Texas, and he's Palestinian from Israel. He has the same picture on in his restaurant." And he said, "You know a Muslim?" I said, "Yeah, he's a good friend of mine. He inspired me a lot. He's part of the reason why I became a Christian is because of this guy." And so he said, I'm surprised. I thought Americans hated Muslims." I said, No, I'm from Texas. Texas is its own little world. It's a different country from the rest of the U.S. I started to tell him about Texas. I live within an hour's drive of three different mosques. There's never been any case of graffiti or any kind of hostility towards these mosques at all. Texans really don't care. As long as you pay your taxes, you're quiet, you don't disturb people, you don't pose a threat to anybody, as long as you're a good person, and nobody's going to care what church you go to, if it's a mosque or synagogue or whatever. So he was really inspired by that, and he wanted me to come to dinner with him and his family. And he also told me he had a daughter that was unmarried, and I told him, no, I can't. I'm sorry. I'm really busy, but thanks again. And I always went back to that same money changer, and he always talked to me on and on, always invited me to dinner. So that was one fun thing that happened to me, okay? And then I always bought pasalubong at that Julia's Bakery. And then, well, this doesn't have to do with the G Hotel, okay? In 2008, there was a hurricane in the city where I lived in Texas. And I was a firefighter. We had to help evacuate this independent living facility. Now, independent living facility is basically a big condo building. In the Philippines, you'd call it a condo. In the U.S., it's kind of like a big hotel. And it's really similar to a hotel, actually. It's probably built the same way a hotel is, except every floor you have a nurse's station. And you have nurses on duty 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, every day. And everybody in this hotel that lives there permanently, okay? And it's like apartments or condos, but they need help. They can't really quite live on their own. Maybe they're incontinent. They have to wear adult diapers. They need help cleaning themselves up. They need help getting dressed. Perhaps they can't walk very well. They need help getting around. So they need help on some level, okay? Perhaps they're on medication. But they can live on their own. It's just once in a while they need help. So that's called independent living, as opposed to a nursing home in the U.S. where people cannot take care of themselves at all, okay? So this is one step, towards that. So this independent living facility, they can't evacuate everybody. They only have a few nurses on each floor. So a lot of these people are in wheelchairs. They just need help physically getting people out of the building and onto school buses that the city has provided these companies school buses so they can get these people out of harm's way before the hurricane arrives, okay? So we're there helping evacuate these people. And one guy I noticed is a World War II veteran. World War II veterans like to wear a cap, a hat, displaying the fact that they're a World War II veteran. And he had other things too. He was wearing an army shirt or an army jacket, if I remember. Well, the two firefighters I was with at the time were both Army veterans of the Iraq War. This is 2008, and they'd been in Iraq in 2004, 2003, something like that. And I was the officer in charge at the time, and I had been to the Philippines twice. I'd been in 2004 and 2008. So right away, when I saw he was a veteran of World War II, I asked him, "Did you ever go to the Philippines?" And his eyes lit up, and he said, "Oh my, yes. I was in Manila." And I was like, "Oh my God, okay, I was in Manila, da-da-da-da-da, I've got these stories." So he said, "Well, I grew up in a farm in Iowa." I can't remember if it was Iowa, Indiana, someplace, the provinces in the U.S., okay? He grew up on a farm. He never really went to a city in his life until he joined the Army and he got trained and sent here, and then he got shipped to the Pacific, where before long he found himself in Manila in 1944 after the U.S. Began taking the Philippines back from the Japanese. So he's stationed in Manila for a couple of years, and he meets this woman, and he falls in love with this woman, and his eyes, you can tell he had these great memories of this woman. So 1946 rolls around, and he's going to get shipped back to the U.S. So he decides he's going to propose to this woman, and he takes her to a hotel. And he said they had a very romantic dinner, they went out dancing, and he takes her back to this hotel, and he has a ring, and he's going to propose, and then he gets quiet, and he gets a little teary. And these two guys who are Army veterans, kind of get close to him, and ask him if he's okay. And he kind of sniffles a little bit and looks up, and he kind of whispers, "And she was a man." So right away, the two soldiers, former Army veterans that I was with, the two firefighters, Iraq War veterans, spun around so they wouldn't laugh in this guy's face, And they're stifling laughter because they just really did not expect that. I didn't expect it. I'm stifling laughter, and I'm trying to look sad because this guy's brokenhearted remembering this. He was really in love with this woman, and he was going to propose, and then he found out when he took her to a hotel room, after dating her for over a year, apparently, that she was a man. And it's just crazy stories like that really you realize that the Philippines is kind of a crazy place. You meet very different kinds of people than you would in the U.S., but at the same time, you really become attached to the place because you realize that these people are free to be these people, and there's a certain beauty about it, okay? The Philippines is really kind of dingy and kind of polluted. Well, Manila, okay? Manila's kind of dingy and polluted. There are beautiful cities in the Philippines that are not polluted like Manila. Iloilo, Davao, just to name a couple. But it's beautiful. And you have to kind of dig into Manila a little bit to really see the beauty and appreciate it. But it's there, and there's so many great stories about this city. I've got so many great stories about it. Every time I would take off and leave Manila, I'd always feel brokenhearted, and every time I'd land, I just feel joy. I love that city. I really thought I could get my wife to fall in love with Manila and just live there permanently. But she's from the provinces, and everything's green, and there's trees everywhere, and there's fruit, and she can grow her own vegetables, and so she had to live in the provinces. So that's why we live in Cavite. Well, I hope you enjoyed my Manila stories. The Australian guy I was with at Robinson's Mall really kind of nodded his head. I think I gave him some hope, that he will see the beauty in it. It's there. It's there. Well, take care, everybody. Have a good day.